Hello everyone and welcome back to Off the Drawing Board, the official Sheffield University Architecture Society podcast. I am Daphne and today I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Krzysztof Nawratek in the podcast studio. Welcome, Krzysztof.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Krzysztof is a senior lecturer at the University of Sheffield, and in this episode we will be taking a different view on architectural humanities. But firstly, I would like to invite you to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your architectural journey so far.
Again, thank you very much for having me here, and sorry for my voice. I had last week, so it's not perfect. I'm Krzysztof Nawratek. I'm in Sheffield for 10 years now. I'm Polish. I did all my education, including PhD in Poland, so it will influence the rest of our conversation. I came to the UK in 2008. I was in Plymouth University, then in Sheffield. In the past, I was also practicing architect, urban designer. I was doing quite a lot of different things.
That's a very good introduction. Thank you, Krzysztof. And very exciting to be expecting what's going to come for today's episode. So I think we will start our podcast as usual with our quick fire round of questions and then dive into the main discussion. So I've got 3 questions for you, Krzysztof. The first one is, what do you find most exciting about architecture?
It's a really interesting question because my father was architect, and as a young person, I never wanted to follow him. And then he tricked me. He gave me Charles Jenk's Modern Movement in Architecture book when I realized that architecture could be seen as applied social sciences, really. I was super fascinated by this book. To some extent, this is what I'm excited about architecture, the complexity of the subject, that architecture has technical elements, engage with social life, economics, with people, with culture. So most of my work at that moment is closer to humanities, put it like that. But I'm also excited about buildings. I'm excited about details, about light, and about the quality of space. I take it very personal. I could be very emotional about buildings because if building is well designed, I feel the care of architect for the building, but through the building to me. So I think that this is elements of the complexity, but also the potential of making the argument. So every time when we design something, we project our vision of the world to the future. Very often it's very optimistic, but it's kind of putting this vision out to the wild for the people to engage with that. And I think that, this word building or argument building part of architecture is probably what I love the most.
It's important to remember that architecture is a form of art as well. So as you say, it has that amazing ability to touch you, but also project a statement, maybe be bold, maybe be optimistic, which we do need today.
Absolutely.
Next, I would like to ask if you have a favorite cuisine.
If I'm asking about that, I always say that it's Malaysian cuisine, but it's probably not fully true. It's not so much about cuisine, it's more about particular dishes and also particular type of food. I like food that is cooked long. So there was a Brazilian moqueca, for example, which I love. There was Malaysian curry laksa that I love. But, as my wife is reminding me, I need to be patriotic, so Polish pierogi. Polish pierogi are important.
It's important to remember the origins as well.
Absolutely.
And it's something that brings you back home.
Yes.
And lastly, I would like to ask if you have any hobbies outside of architecture that you would like to share and particularly enjoy.
I was kind of scared of this question because I don't really have hobbies that, I could impress people at the party. I see hobbies as something that I'm not doing very well, but I still enjoy doing this. In that context, cooking, baking, walking, I like to walk a lot. And very small hobby that I'm really not any kind of nerd, but I strangely enjoy it. I enjoy following elections and results of elections in different places across the globe.
That is actually very interesting. I think these are very good hobbies, Krzysztof. Thank you so much for answering. And I think this brings us really nicely into our main conversation. You have a very new and bold and particular view on architecture humanities. So, to start with, in your architectural research, you take a non-conformist approach towards humanities and you described it as infrastructural. So, I would like you to tell the audience, what is an infrastructural approach towards humanities?
Before I start, I need to make a disclaimer that I'm not trying to be different, not kind of putting myself in a contrast to my colleagues just for the sake of being different. As I mentioned before, my academic trajectory is probably different to majority of people that they are working in humanities. I'm Polish. And the whole education I received in Eastern Europe, which is a particular place. And also my education, architecture education, was very technical. And also my academic career, my first job was teaching undergrad students technology. This is where I'm coming from. And because of that, I don't engage with humanities the same way that many other colleagues. But to answer this question, I would like to address kind of three layers or three perspectives when we talk about humanities. Humanities in School of Architecture, humanities how I understand it and how I do in my own research, my own work, but also humanities in the end of capitalism, in the era of Google and AI. I think that it puts humanities in a context. So starting with School of Architecture, it's not necessarily our School of Architecture, but every School of Architecture is a very diverse place. There are colleagues that they are technical, some of them are engineers, there are colleagues, they are practitioners, there are colleagues that they are humanities people. In probably every other department, there's a certain territoriality involved in that. So different people are kind of building tribes and they try to occupy the place and then, of course, claim the importance. Yeah? So technology people, engineers are saying, without us, architecture doesn't stand, it collapses. This is the most important part. Designing is the essence of what we do. And then humanities people are saying, without us, without understanding of the meaning of what you're doing, all of that is just creating structure. It's not really architecture. So there was this friendly competition going on in School of Architecture, which I don't think is very healthy. I believe I put myself probably in the designer's camp, but not in a tribal way. So I still believe that architecture designing, is the essence of what we do. But I see humanities as a way of bringing different people together. So humanities to me is not about critically evaluating built environment. It's not so much about following particular theories. It's about gluing and giving meaning to practices of designing, practices of constructing. So this is what I mean by this kind of infrastructural attempt to humanities, that you use theories, you use thinkers, you use notions and concepts like tools, like pipes, like beams. You just take them and use them and try if they work for what you try to achieve, to understand the world and your process better.
I find that fascinating because humanities have got a notorious fame that they are just the theory, and then there are the architects that just sit in the background, do the theoretical parts, and just have ideas about things that cannot be implemented. Whereas from your perspective, humanities is actually something that we are going to apply, but just through a different way than a visual element like a beam or like a brick.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting. I read recently the very interesting discussion among philosophers. Philosophy is about building arguments, about logic, about convincing. And there was an argument that this is all fine, but we are losing something. We are losing the creativity. We are losing the joy of putting idea and engaging with that. And I was reading this and I was laughing because this is exactly what architects do. And I had chat with philosopher friend years ago that she told me exactly this, that what she admired in architecture is that you are doing as architects, you are doing what we only can dream about, because at the same moment you make a gesture as a design which is admirative and critical gesture. Yeah, because when you design something, you engage with the context. And to engage with the context, you need humanities. You need to understand what you're doing, what you're engaging with. You need intellectual tools to understand the process and understand what the consequences of your gesture, of your design gesture, of your building or whatever you're putting out there.
And I think that, as you say, maybe a reason that humanities are a bit notorious in the world of architecture is because people don't understand how to apply them or what the theories entail and why we need them and why the creativity part actually draws from it rather than is a separate element of architecture.
I'm always nervous when you put the humanities as a very abstract and separate part. Also from very practical point of view, we are architects, or we engaging with architecture. It means that we are not philosophers. I work, and we probably discuss this later, I work very closely with religious studies scholars. I even flirt with theology, but I'm not a religious studies scholar. I'm not theologian. I'm not trying to be. So I think that keeping my architecture designer identity and tools and the way of thinking, and then engaging with other disciplines, this is much more honest, healthy way to work with.
It has a bit to do with the value of architecture as a very universal study and a very universal subject. So it was a massive thing in the Renaissance, the Homo Universalis, that was summarized in the field of architecture. So somebody who would be an architect would have this universal knowledge, engage with everything.
Universality, it's very contentious term now, because universality through Renaissance and then further, led to colonialism. So there was a very healthy withdrawal from attempt to see architecture as universal discipline, and also seeing architect as someone who knows everything. I think that the way how we teach architecture is still rooted in this wrong vision of architecture. We definitely should work more and more as teams. You and me, we met in your life project. And the life project to me is an exemplar how architecture should be taught, not just for 6 weeks, but in general. Of course, there was a massive problems, IIBA would need to accept it. The way how you see yourself still, individual applying for jobs. So I understand all problems related to this new approach, but in general, ethically, and in the context of what I think architecture is becoming, this way of teaching and working is the way forward.
It gives us a bit of hope about what the architectural profession and the architectural studies can become potentially in the future when engaging with all the tools and all the methods that would be most beneficial for us getting taught.
To answer your question about architecture humanities, I said that I would like also to locate it in the context of the AI, Google, and end of late capitalism, because I think that it's related to this urge that architecture students have to be individual, to be original. So originality is important. And then how you position originality in the context of this abundance of everything. And I think that humanities, again, could allow us to understand this better, because especially in the context of AI, there was abundance of content. It takes seconds to produce passing essay on humanities, on any subject you can get. And that's fine. I don't have problem with. But the way how I believe humanities should operate, the originality in humanities is not about the content, but it's about vector. So it's about where you are coming from, what is your positionality, which is unique. There's nobody else like you, with all your history, where you're coming from, what you're doing, what you're thinking, and your agenda, what you want to achieve. So these 2 points of departure and point of intention, it creates a vector. And this vector is unique, individual to you as a person, as a designer, as a thinker. So if you think about originality as a vector, thinking about humanities is again not about repeating thoughts from books, from articles, from thinkers, but it's about position yourself in this broader context. And this is something that AI can't do, because AI doesn't have agenda. It doesn't need anything. It doesn't want anything. This is where we are coming. So I think that the connection between humanities, originality, and us as designers, to me, it kind of makes sense in a one kind of consistent narrative.
It's like creating your own semiotic code and just abstracting it and applying it in different scenarios, which is much more beneficial than having a one-way thing to everything, because context is very important and what you do needs to be applied in different scenarios.
I absolutely agree. To me, context is a sacred word. So if there was one word that's really defining what I think architecture is engagement with context.
That's very valuable for what is to come as well in the conversation, because we are going to talk about the context of religion, I think. Krzysztof, a big part of your research right now revolves around religion practices and precedents. So this is inherently thought to be a theoretical subject, humanities theoretical field. So, what are your observations regarding the urban application of religion, and how do you think this is translated spatially?
So again, if I can give context and roots, the genealogy of that. So my master thesis 100,000 years ago was about using religion as an element for urban development. Then I engaged a little bit with religion when I was doing my PhD. My PhD was about communist Poland and political ideologies related to space. And Catholic Church was very important kind of counter force in communist Poland. So I had one chapter about Catholic Church and architecture and churches that they have built. And then I kind of completely abandoned this subject. I haven't been doing anything around religion for a very long time. But then I have experience in practice. When I was urban designer in Belfast, I had a project in Shankie Road. Shankie Road is a kind of loyalist Protestant island, more kind of Catholic Republican context. So community of Shankie Road, they were our client. And during troubles, the Shankie Road was really kind of epicenter of these militant groups. So there was a weapon terrorism involved in that. And people living there, they were still kind of hardcore loyalists and Protestant. The company that I was working with, all my colleagues, they were all from Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, or they were from Northern Ireland, but from Catholic background. So they were really uneasy working with this community. But it was the first time when I saw how religion is spatial, is, of course, in connection with ethnicity, in connection with politics, but the religious aspect was important and it had very concrete repercussions. You can see religion is materialized. And then years later, I had this very weird idea to ask if religion is still important. And I started doing, it was 2018, I started doing small research in Sheffield. Then I got very small money and worked with my friends in Brazil that I knew them before, but working with other projects. And this is where it started. And for the last few years, I have been working mostly with my Brazilian friends, which was extremely interesting. And it's just showing me, again, urban and architecture and spatial consequences of religion. Religion in the way how I'm engaging with. It's very material, it's very practical, you can touch it, it's not theoretical.
We think of religion as intangible sometimes, I think because of the concepts that are correlated to it, something superhuman, invisible, celestial, that we can't really place. It is quite significant to remember that the practices that actually happen is here in the real world and we have real communities. The Mass, for instance, is a community coming together in the same space and just engaging with the same activity. So it has this very nice counterbalance of what's intangible and what's the realities of the religion.
I would even question the word intangible here, because to me it would be distinction between beliefs, faith and beliefs, and religion as more sociological phenomena or social phenomena. But even when we talk about beliefs and faith, this is related in the way how we, or people who believe, they see the world. And my work in Brazil was exactly exposing this, that people that they share the same language, the same culture, but they follow different religion, their vision of the world is different. Their vision of nature is different. So their behaviors are different. They behave differently. They use space differently. And of course, they voted differently, which again, it kind of influence what is happening around them. So even in a context of beliefs, it's not immaterial, it's intangible. It has material, very concrete consequence. And then the religion, as you said, there's an institution involved, there money, there power, there buildings. So again, it's very material.
You can see it as early as the Byzantine Empire, the first big example with the schism when it happened in 1054. It was all about what the Catholic Church wanted to gain, which was independence, which was some power of the Pope. Same with the Crusades that happened thereafter. And obviously the Orthodox Church that was trying to maintain that prestige. So these are applied examples of why things happen and how they are translated in any society, contemporary society. Do you have any examples that you think are very interesting and you would like to discuss how the spatial element was influenced?
many different examples. So example from Poland. So as I said, during communist time in 80s, there was a solidarity movement, there was a martial law, but the communist regime was already pretty weak. So it was looking to negotiate with the church. So before that, the church was suppressed, we can say. They were not allowed to build new churches. And Poland was going through massive urbanization. There was a massive number of people moving to cities from rural areas. There was a process, communism was doing industrialization on a massive scale. So in 80s, the communist regime, the government allowed Catholic Church to start building churches. And they built thousands of churches. And they were built by people. They were not professional companies. They, of course, architects who designed them, but it was kind of pre-participatory process. So the projects were discussed with parishioners, with the communities, and then because they need to be mobilized, because then they were coming to the site, they were cleaning the site, they are building the churches. So they're building communities and building churches. And as a material aspect of that, I have very small research that I have done many, many years ago, and it's a very partial. So I'm not quoting this in an academic paper, but I think that I can quote it as an anecdote. So I was discussing and asking and talking with companies producing bricks. And I asked them about this 80s period, about their involvement in with the church. And they told me, the companies that I interviewed, so there was several of them, that almost half of their production was to build churches. So if you think from kind of a purely economic point of view, suddenly you see that faith, religion, and building churches will make these companies much stronger. They really contribute to what came later when communism collapsed, and these companies, they became important players in kind of building materials, capitalist Poland. So, if we are talking about materiality of faith and religion, I think it's a very good example.
That is a very insane amount of money involved and bricks involved and materials. That's a big scale project as well.
The churches were massive, brick built.
And now they're actually on a decline, sort of, because I think that religion is kind of ceasing to be, in some places, as important as it used to be, as influential as it used to be.
Yes and no. So there are places where religion is very important. And, Brazil is a very good example where, still in 70s, Brazil was mostly seen as Catholic country with 95% people declare themselves as Catholics. Now this number is closer to kind of 55. There's a massive number of Pentecostal churches, which they are built, So again, those building processes involve in creating spaces for people to congregate, to be together. On the other hand, the project that I'm doing now, I'm involved with Church of England here in Sheffield. The challenge is kind of opposite. So you're right, the number of worshippers is decreasing, but they have massive infrastructure, they have buildings. So the challenge is, what to do with the space that they have and the buildings that they have, the institution they have, even money what they have. So I don't think that religion will disappear anytime soon. It will fluctuate. There will be more and less. But on a more personal note, I think that religion or faith or belief will always stay because religion is engaging with unknown. It's kind of trying to fill this gap between what we know and what is out there. And because of this kind of almost existential threat of our existence, a challenge, I think that, religion will mutate and there will be new religions, but I don't think that religion will disappear.
If it were to disappear, it would have when we started making scientific discoveries, when the physical philosophers started interpreting the world through phenomena that are actually tangible and real and have an explanation. People obviously were not very accepting of that, and we can see it throughout the years up until now. A lot of people still are not agreeing with a lot of discoveries or a lot of scientific basis that exists right now and in the past. So I think that if it were to disappear, it would have just disappeared already. But we just need that feeling of belief, that feeling of knowing that we have a control over the things that we don't know.
There was a very interesting work done by David Robinson from Open University, who is analyzing how we justify what we know, what truth is. And he's talking about different modes of knowledge, of justification of knowledge. If you talk to people, you realize that none of us really follow just one mode. We construct our understanding of the world from the different fragments. And, scientific is part of that, and it's not contradictory to experiential. I experienced something, so I know it's true, or I felt something, so I know that I felt this. And then element of that is what he called channeled knowledge, which you could see as a religious in the sense that, God told me or angel told me. But you always can see this as a very, very internalized personal, that I just know. I just have this feeling. So it's not necessary that it's religious in this more conventional sense, but it's not rational in the sense that it could be justified on test, on falsify using scientific methods. I just feel it's right and nothing can convince me that it's not.
And you've already foreshadowed it, but talking to us about your current projects that you're working on, you've mentioned two of them. I would like you to tell us, how do you believe that they reflect your worldview of humanities or your research in architecture?
I don't ask really these questions. I just do work that I'm enjoying doing, and I think that it's important. So I don't try to make my position as universal. I don't try to convince people that, this is the only one way of teaching architecture, doing humanities. Absolutely not. This is what I do. This is what I believe suits me. And I'm happy when people want to listen and engage with this conversation. As I said, it's not about creating the model, or maybe it is, but model for discussion. So it's not about doing something universal. My projects that I'm doing at that moment, so I would say that they are related to two books that I'm working on. And one is in Brazil and one is here in Sheffield. The Brazilian project, the contract is already signed, so the project is going on. The authorship is kind of hybrid. It's interesting because I'm the author of the book, but I'm co-author of several chapters. Because I'm not Brazilian, I need help of my Brazilian colleagues, and they are not assistants, they are co-authors. But they are not co-authors of the whole book, they are co-authors of particular parts of the book. And the idea is, again, very material, it's very practical. On one hand, we look on Pentecostal churches that they have politically, the majority of them engage with far-right politics. So they are seen as very conservative and oppressive. But we look on these churches not through their theology, not even through their politics, but through their buildings. And looking through the buildings, there's something different appears. There's a different image. That instead of seeing them only as an oppressive machine of exclusion, we suddenly saw that they are disruptive, but also in a positive way. They create spaces of inclusion. They create spaces that welcome people, create some small havens in the very difficult Brazilian context. So this is one project. The book should be finished till the end of next year, so it's going on. The second project is about Sheffield, and it's directly related to work that the small project that I'm working on, mostly with Church of England. I don't have the contract yet, but I got very interesting email yesterday from the publisher who suggested that instead of putting this book in the religious studies catalog, they would like to put it in theology catalog. Sounds very, very weird to me, coming from architecture background. I'm not theologian, and I never try to be theologian, but they see my work as potentially contributing to theology, which I think it's interesting and fascinating. I'm really excited about that. And the book is about parishes, the Anglican parishes, as a very, to me, fascinating phenomenon that Church of England is national church. So they cover the whole country. And theological position of the Anglican Church is about cure of soul. It means that in the parish, it doesn't matter who you are, if you are worshiper, if you follow, if you believe, the church still should recognize you and care for you. And I think that this mechanism of care related to territory, not to congregation, not to community, not to belonging, not to identity, paradoxically, is very conservative and at the same moment it's a very progressive. This is the project that I'm working on at that moment.
It's wonderful to see, in brackets, theoretical parts applied through case studies. So, as you said, because you're not trying to impose your views on a project, but rather they come out of the projects naturally. I think it's a good example of how that tool can actually both validate the use of humanities and empower their application.
I think that this is very important. I always kind of slightly self-deprecating way, I'm always saying that I'm a very bad researcher because when I'm going to the field always change what I thought that I will be doing. And I try to follow data, what is happening on the field. So from that perspective, also, of course, I'm coming to the field with certain set of concepts, intellectual tools that I think that they could be useful. But then when I engage with the work on the ground, some of them stick, some of them morph or evolve, some of them need to go, and I need to find other tools, other notions, other theories to help me to understand what I'm looking at. So I'm not trying to prove or falsify any big theory. I just try to understand what I'm looking at, what I'm engaging at in this particular place, this particular moment. So I think that, going back to this universality and also to the way how I think that architecture is not universal, it's very local, it's very contextualized. Also, because of that, the humanities that I see is not universal. It's not kind of trying to have one theory to resolve all issues. It's always local, it's always contextualized, it's always here and now. Even if it's a historical and archival work, it's still in a certain, precisely defined context.
It is funny because in undergrad as well, when tutors want to indicate us what a good project is and what a bad project is, they do like to show a beautiful render placed in an extremely wrong context and just say, this is absolutely gorgeous as a drawing. But unfortunately, in real life, that would not be applied. And that sounds quite like the same logic that unless you are versatile with the tools that you're using and the theories that you're engaging with and the methods that you're applying them, you're not going to get the same result, and you're not going to get a good result if you're just applying the same thing over and over again. And to continue on this, a strong element of your research manifesto is your keenness on not rejecting existing structures, both intangible and tangible, but being receptive to them and make them a mean to a more inclusive and welcoming reality.
Well, this is both kind of ethical and kind of methodological approach. So in 2015, I published a book called Inclusivity. And if I can make a small disclaimer, I have a tattoo with radical inclusivity. So it's my credo. It's something that I deeply believe. And it put me sometimes in troubles because it could be self-contradictory, how you say that you are fully inclusive. What about things that you definitely shouldn't be inclusive? But we can talk about this if we have time. But to me, inclusivity or radical inclusivity is important exactly because I just don't know. I can't claim that there is a truth that I'm fully convinced that it's universal. So I'm just to some extent cautious or even scared of rejecting or excluding things that they may be right and may be useful. So this is this kind of methodological approach that you engage with different methods. And ethical, I think that it's obvious. It's probably this moment when we discuss about the deep conviction. There's nothing you can do to convince me to forget about radical inclusivity as an ethical position. I just deeply believe that everybody should be included.
How has this been applied so far in university? Have you found it easy or hard to engage people in radical inclusivity?
Well, I talk about this. I teach from that perspective, and students, they are pretty receptive and they find it useful, interesting, because I also try to show this, how it's applied in space, in architecture. And I think that this is very architectural, urban way of thinking, because look on this building, this is very, by definition, is inclusive. We are here recording a podcast in this particular room, but there's other rooms that the other things are going on. And this is the inclusivity that architects can think as a default, as given. When you talk to more kind of political science and social sciences, they think with not restricted inclusivity. The inclusivity that is coming from architecture, it has walls, it has windows, it has barriers, it has kind of time lapse. So it's not about everything goes. It's about everything goes, but not the same time and not the same place.
So it's kind of like parallel realities operating at the same time and just overlapping with each other, or not necessarily being in the same space, in the same society, in the same city.
Exactly. And then, to me, the most important question, and going back to my infrastructural humanities and infrastructure as one of my obsessions, I'm less interested in the content of these rooms, what's going on there and what people are doing there. I'm more interested in mechanism allowing people to interact or not. So mediation between these different worlds, these parallels, universes that we are talking about. Again, it is happening anyway. If you think about the city, we all, use the same pavement. We very often use the same institutions or, shops or whatever. So radical inclusivity, it's not abstract theoretical concept. It's coming from the very pragmatic observation of urban reality. And it's a kind of accepting this, that it's not about unifying people and forcing people to be one. It's exactly about accepting that people are not one. They are multiplicity, a multitude, but we still need to live side by side. And how we can live side by side in the building, in the city, when we disagree with each other, this is the question that it's the most important to me.
It kind of highlights the difference between being equal and being different, because a lot of people seem to flatten it out and consider that in order to be equal, we need to be the exact same as well. But equity is not the same in a society, especially applied spatially, where currently we've got a lot of socio-political issues, as with any society, and that's reflected in how we operate within space. So once you flatten the structure between everybody, we kind of lose that feeling of equity of how we use the space.
I think that there's a few different things at the same moment. So the diversity is one thing, and I would definitely defend it. But at the same moment, we mustn't forget about power and power relationships, because this is where the discussion about mediating interaction infrastructure is coming from. It's not accepting the fact that we are different and we want to live different lives is one thing, but then saying that, okay, so I accept inequality, or you are different, so you just go and live there and I live in much better place. This is not okay. But this is about infrastructure, this is about power, this is what not negating and flattening the diversity is about, making sure that people are not oppressed, simple like that they really can live as much as possible their full life.
Your mentioning of the power game in all of this leads very nicely into the final and very hard question, which is that the ideology that we coexist and operate harmoniously in the same context is bold and it's challenging, because we do live in a very egoistical society. We have this game of power, so whoever gets the power gets a bit of the privileges, gets to have a bigger say than somebody else, for instance. So this egoistical prevalence, how could it be pushed to be replaced with a more accepting and diverse urban and architectural reality?
I think that, seeing us as humans as egoistic by nature, I don't think it's true. I think that the system is making us like that, and the system of oppression. So it's not about kind of justifying bad behaviors, but I think that a lot of things that people are doing that they shouldn't be doing, the misogynist behaviors, the racist behaviors, they are not coming because people are inherently evil. They are very often coming because people feel neglected, feel oppressed, feel weak. And they, in a completely evil way, on the wrong way, maybe not evil, wrong way, they try to compensate on groups that they are even weaker. But it's not coming from them as bad people. It's coming from oppressive system that it's oppressing them and showing them the only way to survive is to oppress other people more. And I think that, of course, we are architects, we design spaces. And then, of course, we also are citizens, we vote. Yeah? So this is our decision, a kind of political decision. But in architecture world, in our practice, there's also always a question how you design spaces that you don't oppress people, you don't hurt people. You make spaces for everybody. The whole discussion about trans rights and, the absolute discussion about toilets. We as architects, we have, absolutely basic solution for that. We are making toilets that they are gender neutral. And then that the discussion is pointless. So Of course, we can't, as architects, change the law. We can try to do this as citizens in voting. But in practical sense, doing our job, we can influence what is happening on the ground. Going back to my first answer about what makes me fascinated about architecture, this moment of care when I enter the space and I feel that I'm important in this building because the architect was thinking about me, my weakness or potential disabilities or preferences. If I see this, then I become very emotional because this is about the love through architecture, through our practice. And this is what we can do as architects.
It brings the user, which is the human, back into the planning of the building, because sometimes it tends to be a bit separate, that we're just creating space, but we forget that there's somebody who is going to, for instance, use this podcast booth and come here to record. So how are they going to use it? What do they need? How can we make their experience better? How can we make it more meaningful?
But this is also directly related to what I was saying about this acknowledging of diversity, or radical diversity, and then radical inclusivity. So we are not the same. We have different bodies, different abilities, different perception of the world. Everything is different. Understanding, for us as designers, understanding that this is what our users of our spaces who are, that they're not the same, and try to address these different needs, different limitations, different dreams, expectations. It's a kind of challenge, and this is the basic ethical requirement for doing good architecture.
Maybe can lead to problems being resolved as well. So the issues we've got in the system that makes people act the way they do, or that brings out the less good qualities in them, because as you said, you believe that they're not inherently evil, and actually kind of matches to what Socrates says, that nobody's inherently evil. But because those systems are implemented, we as architects might be able, even a little bit, to shift them towards a better place.
Yeah, maybe I'm naive, but yes, I believe that we can, and definitely we should keep trying.
It leads back to what you mentioned in the beginning about optimism and how we should have it in our architecture and our art, which is a wonderful circle back to the beginning. And I think that's a great point to conclude this discussion on. Very optimistic and very positive. It's been wonderful to have you in the podcast booth, Krzysztof, and thank you so much for engaging in this conversation. I found it fascinating.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. The conversation is only as good as two people taking part in conversation. So thank you very much.
It's wonderful to hear, and I really hope you enjoyed being here today. And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all at the next episode.